Welcome everyone to the first SASE Women and Gender Forum event of this year, titled Gender in the Field of Socio-economics, Current and Future Perspectives. My name is Hyojin Seo, and I am one of the committee members of Women and Gender Forum at SASE, and I will be the moderator of today's session. We are very happy to have Julia from Radboud University here today to present her recent research on the publication patterns in Socio-economic review, or SER, with gender lens. Julia is also one of the committee members of Women and Gender Forum. Before we start with the presentation, I would like to give the floor to another committee member, Anya, to introduce the Women and Gender Forum for those of you who are new. Then we will have the presentation by Julia, followed by the discussions of Alya and Akos, who are the chief editors of SER, and Nina, who is also an editor of SER and the president-elect of SASE. I will now give the floor to Anya.
Okay, thanks, Hyojin. Jacob, could you please pull up the slides? Thank you. Okay, so welcome from my end as well. As Hyojin already introduced, I'm Enya. I'm another committee member of the SASE Women and Gender Forum. And before we come to the main part of this event, which will be Julia's presentation and the following discussion, I would like to introduce you very briefly to the WEG Forum, which is the host of this event. So if you could please go to the next slide, Jacob. Okay, so the aim of the SASE Women and Gender Forum, or WEG Forum, is to improve gender equality, not only within SASE, the Society for Socio-Economics, but also in the broader research field. And we aim to do so by following these 4 action points, which is on the one hand to increase visibility of women and gender plus scholars and their work, on the other hand, to establish a network not only of women and gender plus scholars, but also of those researchers who cover similar research areas. Furthermore, we want to stimulate discussions on the pressing issues faced in academia and beyond for women and gender plus scholars. And last but not least, we monitor and support the representation of these scholars within SASE across different research groups and different leadership levels. Next slide, please. Okay, thank you. And we are going to do so, or we follow these several aims by hosting a series of events. So today's event is the first in a series of several events on the matter, virtual and in person. This is a very short look at what we have upcoming. So there will be another virtual event in July on gender inequalities in academia. Then there will be several in-person events at the SASE conference in Rio, and then several months afterward we have another virtual event. However, there will be much more events than those, and if you want to keep updated on the events that are to follow, please follow us at our SASE website, the link of which has also been posted in the chat right now. And we will be updating this page regularly with information and news on upcoming events. Next slide, please. Thank you. And then lastly, these are the WEG committee members, most of whom are present today as well. And please, if you have any questions or inquiries regarding the work of the WEG Forum, any concerns you want to discuss, or maybe even ideas or suggestions for future events, please feel free to reach out to us using the email address at the bottom of this page. I think it is also posted in the chat as well. So yeah, feel free to reach out to us. We are happy to hear from you. And now I don't want to keep you any longer from the main part of the presentation. And I'm very happy to hand over to Julia now. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Anya. I'm sharing my slide now. So now it's working. Yes. Okay. Are you seeing my slides on the presenter mode?
Presenter mode.
Okay, good. Then no, it should be fine. Great. So thank you, and thanks for the nice introduction today. I'm going to present a paper which is called Gendered Publication Patterns in the Socio-Economic Review, a reflection. And this is shared work together with my wonderful colleagues, Nora Lohmeyer, Carolin Auschra, and Gregory Jackson, and it will soon be available in SER. So this is a bit kind of an introduction to something that will be published soon. So we developed this paper for the 20th anniversary issue or 20th anniversary of SER to look back at the role of gender among authors and reviewers. So our aim is to put a spotlight on the diversity of scholarly voices within the community of socioeconomics. So this is important since we know from formal research that there exists a large underrepresentation of women in many other research fields and also in journals. So here we are asking the question, how is the situation in SER and in the field of socioeconomics? To start with, I will show you the share of women publishing in SER over the last 20 years. So we can see an increase from a low average of 25% of female authors in earlier years to an average of 32% of female authors in the last years. So this is here illustrated by the green line. Such a development of female representation is very similar to many other journals, but yet we also have to consider that there exist also journals which do much better in female representation. So here they show clear leadership in female representation, and SEI is not there yet. So an important benchmark to compare the publications in SER is, of course, to the representation of women at SASE. So in this figure here and shown by the dotted lines, we see the representation of women at SASE conferences or those participants who identify themselves as female. And we see that over time, this share is kind of quite stable and it's over more or less 42%. And we can conclude that compared to SER, we still see a large and persistent gap, which is decreasing, of course, but still we can see a kind of persistent legacy of males publishing in SER. So the important question is, where is this lower level of women publishing in SER coming from? First, we analyzed gender patterns for all articles submitted to CSR. Submissions are, of course, one major influence for publications. This figure here illustrates the share of submissions, and we can see a clear dominance of submissions by male authors. The share of women among submitting authors climbed from a low share of around 20% to a little more than 30% in recent years. And again, comparing the share of female researchers at SASE to this share of women submitting to SER, we see a large underrepresentation of women, which still remains today. Second, we were also interested to get to know if SER has a leaky pipeline. So if women and men have a different acceptance ratio. Here, and this is super important, the dotted lines illustrate that the acceptance ratio for women and men is almost identical. So they have identical chances for acceptance at SER. So a preliminary conclusion here is that a large gap exists in submission and that overall acceptance likely plays a minor role. So beyond these aggregate levels of representation of women, we also wanted to understand underlying patterns which might influence such overall underrepresentation. One such pattern is co-authorship. So we assume people are actually collaborating. Here, and I know this figure is a bit messy, but I will help you through this figure. So here we see the gendered author constellations of articles published in SER. So we see on the one hand articles published by a single author female and all authors female, and authors mixed, all authors male, and single authors male. So all kinds of constellations with whom you can publish a paper. And overall, we can conclude that the figure reveals a strong dominance of old boy networks. And why this is the case. The figure shows that the share of articles written by men only remained dominant, with over 50% until very recently. These are the two red boxes at the bottom of this figure. In comparison, articles written by women only peaked at around 30% in some years, while showing large annual fluctuations. These are the two greenish boxes at the top of this figure. And importantly, here most articles are coming from single-authored papers, while all female teams are still very rare. In the middle, we also see here with the striped boxes, we see the share of articles in mixed author teams, so in collaboration between women and men. Such authorship constellations are between 20 and 30% in the across time, and what is important is that this number seems to stagnate now. So in a nutshell, we can see that the most common constellation of authorship are men's clubs. So all male authored papers, whereas women clubs are still an exception. So why this is so relevant is because this is also super influential for individual researchers, because it's influencing publication pathways. So for instance, for women, they are most often publishing in mixed gender teams, whereas men, by comparison, publish most often in all male author teams. So we see there is a quite distinct way of how to publish in SER, and overall this also shows limited opportunities for female authors in terms of with whom they are collaborating. So next to these authorship constellations, we also looked at gender topic specialization, because we know that this exists across many social sciences, including political science and sociology. And against this background, we identified the topics that exist in SER by using topic modeling, and then we're interested in how these topics are distributed between men and women. And we call this gender segregation. And this table here is illustrating the most and the least gender segregated topics. So for instance, comparative capitalism has a share of 84% men and a share of 16% of women. And on the other hand, HRM here at the bottom of this table has 43% male and 57% women. So we see that on the one hand, the share is quite unequal between comparative capitalism and HRM. So for comparative capitalism, it's much more unequal or imbalanced. And we also see that, of course, there is a kind of quite a difference in how many women and men we have among different topics. Importantly, for these two groups, we also observe differences in popularity. So next to gender segregation and publication, we looked also in the differences in how popular a topic is for women and men in their submissions. And here illustrated by the minus, we see that the topics at the top of this table are much less popular for women than the ones at the bottom. And finally, we were also interested if there is a kind of a difference in success rate between these different or between different topics in general, and also between these groups here. And again, we see that women have a lower success rate in the highly segregated topics, so those at the top of this table, and they have a higher success rate in those topics which are less segregated, so here illustrated at the bottom of this table. So we see there exists more differences in terms of success rate when we look at different topics and not only at the overall success rate. And this is also an illustration about topics, because what we did not see at the earlier slide was that the topics which are highly male dominated or have a male majority are much more common in SER. So these are here illustrated by the grayish dots on the left-hand side. In contrast, the topics which are more gender equal or which also have a slightly higher share of females, they're quite rare. These are here the orange and green dots. So we have to keep in mind that most topics in SER are rather male dominated. So finally, a journal is not only about authors, but also about reviewers, because they're also an important group of actors making up a journal. We also looked at reviewers and if the process of reviewing is gendered. So first, we looked at 3 different reviewer constellations. So these are all female reviewers, or male reviewers, or a team of both male and female reviewers, which we call mixed here. And we see that almost 1/3 of all submissions still have an only male reviewer team, whereas only female reviewer teams are still quite low. So there seems also be not a lot of change happening in the last almost 20 years. But of course, we also see that at the moment, mixed reviewer teams are the kind of default. Whereas this somehow reflects the share of male and female authors in SER, what is striking is if we link this figure back to the authorship constellations. So asking the question, who is actually reviewing whom? So in this figure, we see that notably up to 50% of papers written by male single authors or male teams are exclusively reviewed by male reviewers. So these are the 2 bars here at the right-hand side. And the 2, and here the black areas illustrate the all male reviewers. And this is together in both of these articles, it's around 50%. By contrast, when we look here at the left-hand side of this figure, so the papers written by female, we only see a slightly higher number of papers being reviewed by females only. So, and this is here visible with the kind of very light grayish bar. So in total, this finding underlines the notion of closed networks, where those papers written by men have a particularly high chance of being reviewed by men only. And this network is on the one hand, much smaller for women, and on the other hand, also seems more open. So what is our conclusion? So we could summarize that the representation of female authors in SER has increased in the last 20 years, and it is about 30% today. This is similar to other social sciences. And interestingly, and overall, men and women have the same acceptance ratio. And this is suggesting that overall submissions are the major influence for gender imbalance and less so a leaky pipeline. And what are key areas for future change? 2 areas are for us particularly striking. The first is that major differences exist in gendered authorship constellations. So men have a very different and much broader set of publication possibilities, and most often do publish in male-only teams. In contrast, women most often publish in mixed gender teams, and female-only teams are rare. Second, and when talking about research topics, we illustrated the existence of male islands. So areas where men dominate in publications, which are very popular among male authors and submissions, and where men have a higher success rate. The topics make up the majority of all topics. And importantly, female islands are much more seldom. So to sum up, we see a clear development towards very definitely better female representation over the last 20 years. But at the same time, we identify several areas for improvement. So to conclude, we think it's important to mind the gap and to be aware of it for being able to tell a different story at the 30th anniversary of SER. Thank you and happy birthday, SER.
Alya, would you like to start your discussion if you're ready?
Sure. Thank you. Thank you, Julia and the authors team, and thank you, the organizers of this forum, to allow us to read, engage, and participate and respond. and think collectively about what can be done. So thank you, Julia, again, for collecting and analyzing the data. We actually hope that this could become the norm in the journal. I would like it to be this sort of periodic attempts at self-accounting or self-assessment or self-monitoring, not only when it comes to gender, but other criteria and measurement of our trajectory with respect to diversity and in comparison to other journals in the field of socioeconomics. So to quickly recap what has been said. So SER has made some strides in the right direction in the past several years. These strides are to be celebrated, of course, although please know that Akos and I have nothing or little to do with these advancements, as the period from which the data are drawn only overlaps with our tenure by about 1 year. And given the backlog, most of those papers were still shepherded in under Gregory Jackson's. So kudos to him. Too bad he's not here to participate today. We always knew that Gregory was steering a tight ship, but it's even more evident now that it's been sailing in the right direction. We're particularly relieved, I have to say, that the overall acceptance rates are similar, irrespective of the gender of the authors. At the same time, it's certainly too early for us to rest on laurels. SCR's authors' gender composition does not even match the SASE membership composition and is far from gender parity. Although we're proud to note that under our watch, the number of female editors grew from 1 or 2 to 4, myself including, an editorial board currently is majority female. So we're really interested in exploring possible strategies and look forward to the discussion afterwards. But for now, let me focus quickly on the paper's finding and recommendations in greater detail. So since women authors constitute about 30% of SCR authors, but the acceptance rates are the same across gender, it means that only about 1/3 of papers we receive are authored by women. This is what Julia reported. How can we influence the pipeline? You mentioned 2 possibilities. One is through SASE membership. 42% of SASE members are women. And the other one through the reviewer pool. While only 30% of SCR reviewers are women, you suggest ways to draw more women into reviewing for SCR, with the hope that reviewing will inspire them to submit their work to us. I don't think you focused on this in the presentation, but it's certainly a significant part of the paper. We would, of course, be absolutely thrilled if more women members of SASE submitted their work to us, but it's not entirely clear what, if anything, can be done by SCR. Perhaps additional research is needed to understand the overlaps between SASE memberships and members and authors of papers submitted to SCR. For example, what percentage of male SASE members ever submitted to SCR, and what percentage of female SASE members? And if these percentages are different, what could account for the difference? For example, we're wondering whether status and stage in the career has something to do with this. I mean, we see this in other professions that sort of change their gender composition, like medicine, for example, or I think Nina and I a long time ago explored the changing membership gender-wise of the economic sociology section of the ASA. So overall, you sort of see the changes, but the change mainly comes from younger women, so women at the beginning of their career. And that has obviously, huge implications for who publishes with whom and who is able to submit what kind of papers. So I think it would be interesting to kind of continue exploring this data, but also bring in that sort of other variable of the stage in the career or status in the equation. Here's one, one possible idea actually about this specific sort of direction. As chief editors, Akos and I think of editing the journal not only in terms of gatekeeping, but also in terms of paper development. One of our special projects when we assumed these roles recently was to expand the reach of the journal geographically, sort of to expand the diversity of the papers, in terms of the region and institutions that the authors come from. We often report in sort of our front-facing engagements with the authors or the public that we receive submissions from more than 50 countries, but in fact, we publish authors from many fewer. So to increase submissions from Asia and Latin America, we appointed an Asia editor, and we're currently actively looking for one with expertise and professional ties in Latin America. Capitalizing on this year's conference in Rio, we're planning on hosting a 3-part writing and publishing workshop. Actually, Gregory is leading this effort. So that's a very exciting development. The workshop will be aimed at attracting and nurturing work by scholars from Latin America, specifically. We hope that the training we provide will not only draw more submissions from the region, but also draw better submissions and increase the share of accepted papers for authors hailing from outside the US and Western Europe. So the question is, can something similar be organized by this forum for female researchers, perhaps specifically for junior scholars, if indeed research finds or data analysis finds that there's like this disparity in terms of the status or stage of career between women and men authors. Regarding the hope that drawing more women into the review process will have an effect of drawing more of them to submit to SCR. So this seems intuitive, except since I often look up authors or submitted papers and potential reviewers in the SCR author and review database just to see whether they've published or reviewed in the past, at least anecdotally, it looks like a lot of reviewers never submit, and probably even more authors who submit papers never reviewed. Since reviewing is a time-consuming service work that even if it's starting to be recognized through Publons, for example, it is still not rewarded. I would be careful in advocating for more women reviewers who do disproportionate share of unrecognized and unrewarded academic service work anyway, unless there is a pretty convincing evidence that reviewing is likely to encourage subsequent submissions. In terms of future research on our practices, the sort of self-monitoring that I mentioned in the beginning, we would like to understand how reviewing and submitting are connected. Perhaps our next year's SCR interns can investigate this. Another reason why there's an advocacy for more women reviewers is because this would benefit women authors whose work, particularly if it's single authored, tends to go through a high number of revisions. Taking more time and potentially distracting from submitting new work. Female reviewers, you find, tend to recommend accept earlier in the process of revision. So earlier in terms of the number of revisions required compared to male reviewers. But you also find that female reviewers are more critical and likely to recommend reject at the first stage. This suggests that drawing on more female reviewers may indeed reduce the number of revision rounds, which will benefit female authors to tend to go through more of them, but possibly reduce the acceptance rate because more authors will be stopped at the first round of review. This simply is an observation of somewhat contradictory kind of recommendation. Finally, you advocate for more female reviewers and for mixed reviewer teams because those are likely to dismantle what you argue are possible quote-unquote male islands, male authors writing on male-dominated topics whose work is reviewed by male reviewers. Well, quite honestly, we're not sure a different mix of reviewers should matter in itself in a blind review. But more importantly, it's likely that the choice of reviewers is largely driven by substantive issues, which means paper's topic and approach. You also acknowledge that this is partially due to topics in the paper. Some of which attract topics which attract disproportionate number of male researchers, and many of which have been at the core, these topics, at the core of SCR's enterprise. So, and this is the point to which I now turn. We actually find the second set of suggestions around male and female dominated topics to be far more promising and actionable, at least from our perspective as SCR editors. So editors have only limited control, of course, over the topics we end up publishing because we don't choose what's submitted to us typically. It is worth thinking why authors submit what they do. So some topics have been SCR's favorite since the beginning, such as comparative capitalism, the most popular topic or the most male-dominated topic rather, that you've indicated. Others grew following the individual editor's expertise, dual labor markets and vocational training, for example. And yet others reflect some major political and economic trends or events, financialization and inequality, for instance. So topics constitute the feel and the vibe of the journal and ultimately shape what sorts of work gets submitted. But I bet you that the popularity of topics change over time. And I actually would like to see how that's reflected in what's happening with SCR. And I don't think you've looked at the change in topic popularity over time, kind of through the lens of gender, but I bet you that the rise in the percentage of women authors is connected with a relative rise in popularity of certain topics over time. So what can we do as editors, I think, is signal our interest in new or different topics or approaches, in particular those that tend to attract more women authors. So this may take a form of publishing one or two good and eventually well-cited papers that are outside of SCR's traditional repertoire, or even better, because this would not rely on chance of submission, commissioning a special issue on topics that clearly signal our desire to publish more on topics more likely to be favored by women authors. We're happy to report that this year we're in preparation of publishing 2 special issues, one on gender and wealth accumulation, edited by all-women team, and another one on global governance and emergence of a post-neoliberal order, which is edited by a mixed gender team. And one other thing before I close this is that what can also work as a signaling mechanism is selecting certain papers as editors' choice papers, which we have the power to do. Basically, this means that the one paper per issue typically becomes free to access on SCR or UP website, usually for a period of time. And that usually increases their visibility because there's more clicks and more kind of engagement with the authors. And in the 5 issues that Akos and I have put together so far, we had 1 paper authored by male authors, two papers authored by a mixed gender team, and 2 papers authored by women authors. So this is where I'll stand. I'll end. Thank you again for doing all the work, but also initiating this very important conversation. And I look forward to Nina's comments too.
Thank you so much, Alya. I will transition because I really would like to hear from this audience. So delighted to be invited to participate in a topic that's very dear and near to my heart. And Alya has provided such excellent comments. Some of it consider in a sociological pattern as holding more true, because I will repeat them, and others I will try to add and also insert a little bit of my reflection being an editor of SCR, and I am no longer. My term finished this past December after many years, and the journal in such great hands with Alya and Akos. So I have a few slides because it is 8 a.m. my time, and I was delighted to see that people are joining us from all over the world, really, putting comments in chat. And my title, trying to jazz it up a little bit here, of course, is a reflection or a play on these historical trends with Sally the Riveter in the US that was emphasized to include women in the war effort. In 1943 was this poster. And then recently, this idea that we've come a long way, that's a play on a commercial for actually cigarettes in the 60s in the US. So my question is, have we come a long way, baby? And I will just have a few reflections on the paper. Thank you so much for doing all this effort, Julia and team. And again, did I mention to the SASE Women and Gender Forum for organizing this? I think it's such an important effort, and thank you for all the future events that you will do. So we could look at some of these statistics, either as glass half full or glass half empty. And I will say that the good news is that this authorship gap is narrowing over time, given the relatively constant share of women who are SASE members. And that's very curious to me, right? That in fact, I believe this is quite unusual for an organization that focuses on topics of society and economy to have a relatively large representation of women. And I will tell you a little bit more about why that is. Now, of course, there is still a gap, and there is even a wider gap in submission, which we've identified as really important here. And there are great differences for some of the topics that also my colleagues have discussed. You know, varieties of capitalism versus some others that attract more women authors, it appears. So notice the sigh of relief here, right? This has been largely the time that I've been editor. I want to tell you that I started as the first woman editor of SER in 2011. And so when I looked at some of these trends, I couldn't help but notice that, in fact, the submission and it has not to do with me much, but the fact that these lines are together, acceptance for women and men authors since about 2011, moving forward was heartening, absolutely. I also wanted to tell you that with Chief Editor Gregory Jackson, who came on board, I think, just a few months after I started, we have had over the years discussions, and I tried to dig up one of the emails, I think the earliest on this topic from 2013, to think a little bit about what's going on. And it's not that we could very intentionally do anything concretely, or maybe we should have, and it didn't occur to us. All these great ideas that now Alya shared, that Alya and Akos can implement, are awesome. But it was just reflection on how important this is, and that it is really important for us to keep it in mind. I certainly, as an editor, in the back of my mind, have been thinking about how the journal is open and inclusive, including to women authors. And so I think perhaps this has something to do with the fact that in the earlier years, it's all over the place, and the gaps in the earlier years are quite wide in some cases. Now, going back to how I said that I'm delighted that 42% of SASE members are women or identify as women, the list here to the left are some of the fields that are represented among SASE members. And you might guess, the three most prevalent ones are political science, sociology, and economics. Now, there is a great variety in these fields. And I know that we are from a broad array of countries here, and things might be different across disciplines in different countries. But just very recently, I came across some data for the US that I wanted to share that may be surprising to some of you. So this was data from the academic analytics and its gender composition of the professoriate of many universities and most all of the Research One institutions, but also others. And here I'll give you a snapshot, a picture of these three fields. Sociology first, darker shade male authors and lighter shade female authors. And you see how there is, in fact, a difference in the pipeline. And that is that currently, the field is quite feminized. You know, professors who are assistant level are 59% for women. And at the full professor level, that there is a gap, right? It's a broader gap. And Alya addressed some of this, right? Career stage. So I do think we have some evidence related to that, especially when we look at political science, which was surprising to me that only, especially at the full professor level, such a small share, right? About less than a fourth are full professors, and it's not quite parity even at the assistant professor level. Now, the picture is even more dire for economics. only about 28% at the assistant level, and such a thin slice of 15% at the full professor level. So when you think a little bit about the diversity of these fields and gender composition, I think that idea that 42% of SASE members are women is quite compelling, and that in fact how we think about the publications and who submits makes sense, because we would need to look at some of these disciplinary differences. I've written a bit on these topics for economic sociology in the US, and not just to advertise my article, but to reinforce 2 points. This was done in 2019. I looked at membership of economic sociology section, publications in top journals there, American Journal of Sociology, American Sociological Review, and there was a gap. It was an even wider gap that the reported one in the paper about SCR. But one thing was common, that was the topics, right? The topics seem to have been gendered, a difference in who submits on different topics. And something we haven't mentioned yet is also methods. Not necessarily a direct evidence from this paper, but what I reviewed in it was that other researchers have pointed to a difference in use of methods, gender-wise, qualitative more than quantitative for women authors. So this is another opportunity for research for our data from SCR, is to understand how are the methods potentially different. And we know, and I can reflect upon my term as editor, that there has been lack of representation in a more broader sense of methods, or I should say there was representation, but certainly not inclusion at the equal level across different methods. And let me say that for the first time that the special journal issue was, not the first time, but one of the special issues on elites and socioeconomics with the mixed gender guest editors team attracted several women authors. And I think that issue had probably slightly more women authors, and they contributed qualitative research, ethnographic research on these issues. So just to say, this might be something for us to consider when we think about these differences and how to overcome it. I do note that Alya and Akos both have continuously emphasize this idea of inclusion and diversity, and I imagine also related to methodological approaches. We, of course, can go a longer way. And what are some of the ways? Certainly, these kinds of fora and the fact that we do have women and gender forum within SASE is terrific. It has made a huge difference. One could see a little bit as to whether in the past several years that WAG has been wagging the tail at SASE, whether that has made a difference in publications, right? And submissions to more and more submissions rather than publications in SER. Women in leadership, I noted that Alya mentioned about more women being editors, and that the majority of editorial board now of SCR are women. Certainly, we have had many women leaders also at the helm of SASE. And that is a good signaling mechanism. It's not sufficient, and it, of course, it's not going to lead to effects immediately, but just notable presence is important. I remember so many times when I was several years back, less now, the only woman in the room, the only woman writing something for a prominent publication. There are the Handbook of Economic Sociology now, the International Handbook of Economic Sociology. Such scarcity, and much less even than the 32% that we have representation in SCR publications. So I think that broader field is really important to take into consideration. Oh, let's see. to signal that this is important to the journal's mission. And I think Alya and Akos have done great in the effort with Gregory. I'm so looking forward. I didn't even know in Rio of a threefold session. Thank you so much for putting in the time. And please, everyone here, spread the word. Welcome everyone. It's so important that somebody tells you about this, right? You're not just reading it. It might be more important for younger career scholars or perhaps women scholars, who knows? But I think telling somebody about this effort may make more difference than just reading about it, in what kind of sessions are being organized in Rio. And I do hope to see a lot of you in Rio. That process, right? The process and the experience. We know it can be so disheartening, especially, I think, in the earlier stages with our first few papers and these rejections and the constant rejections. So to have the developmental approach that we've tried to foster at SER, and Alya and Akos are also committed to, I think is super important, as well as being timely. It really matters, right? It really matters whether you get feedback. And that has been so hard these days after the pandemic. Getting reviewers, I think, has really been a struggle. Can talk a little bit more about that. Alya did also mention, like I said, now you know this must be true. All of these things align so well, and the two of us didn't coordinate, but we get along very well, so I'm not surprised that there is an upcoming Gender and Wealth special issue. And I have to say, this was the last one that I participated in decision-making about, because the editorial team thinks about the proposals that came in, and very happy that we'll see this happen. And very small point before the discussion, well, not small at all, right? Try to pass a joke that probably is more bitter than sweet here. We have a long way to go more broadly to be making academia more inclusive. And even if we see numbers going up, does that mean that this is a sustainable career and a rewarding career overall for all its members? We have a long way to go on that one. And I would definitely be happy to hear if you have some suggestions related to that more broadly. So I do not want to keep us from the discussion. I thank you very much for your attention and look forward to your comments.
Thank you very much again for the presentation on this important topic and thought-provoking discussions. We will now open our discussion to the audience. Please raise your hand using the raise hand button if you have any questions or if you would like to share your thoughts.
While people are raising their hands, I just want to say that the Rio workshop is a three-part workshop. The second part is going to be at the conference. The first and the third will be on Zoom, and you can sign up if you registered for the conference at the SASE website.
We have one, is it Alice?
Yes, hello. Hi. Thank you so much for this. It's very interesting, illuminating, and I'll keep my questions brief. First, I wanted to follow up on something Nina said about methodology, and this was a question I had in the SER paper, if you had noticed a difference in methodology by submission and by gender. And then my second question was regarding the composition of the professoriate, I believe. And I'm wondering if there's any insight into generally non-tenure track faculty, as well as specifically in terms of submissions to SER. Thank you.
Yes, thank you very much for the question. So about the first question about the methods, no, we did not look at this because you really have to go through each paper because it's kind of not easy to identify the methods automatically. So I think it's super important to do this, but it just would mean a lot of work. So we just thought, okay, this would be a different paper, another paper about this. And the question about the career stage or the status level, we don't know this for SER, because this is also kind of, you don't know which position people had when they submitted the paper, and then they maybe changed also the position during the review process and all this. So it's quite complicated and also to trace back. And but of course it's super interesting. But what we know is about people identifying being a PhD candidate at SASE. And we know that the level is slightly higher for this status group. So talking about kind of different levels or different status groups, yes, we see more women at this level of the academic career, but it's not a huge difference. Yeah, but it's if I remember well, it's about 5% or so. So there is a difference, definitely. Maybe just one very minor point about the status level, and also about kind of the different professorships. I think it's super important, but it's also important to keep in mind that although there are many more assistant professors who are female, it's also important to keep in mind that we would like to keep them staying in academia, right? And this is then also linked to successful publishing. So it's also a bit kind of a recursive relationship. So if the aim is that they stay in academia, they also need to publish well. So it's a bit it's a really tricky problem. So, but just a minor note. So thanks for the great question.
Thank you. I think it would also be interesting to look at non-tenure track.
And if I can quickly say on the non-tenure track, that is a very important point, right? And it is about those pipelines. I don't think we really have information related to that. There are very few scholars who are independent scholars who publish in SCR. And non-tenure, if you have an affiliation, right, would not show. But I think it's just super hard. It's super hard to, because there are bigger teaching and service loads, and to think, how one carves the time for research and for following through with, the revision process, et cetera, moving forward. So I think that that's really important, and whatever institutions can do to support non-tenure track at their own. We have, for instance, organized at UC Irvine writing groups, writing accountability groups, just giving space for people to come, not on their own, but with a group. And those have been pretty successful. So I'll just say, because I do recognize your point, Elise. Thank you for raising it. We have a few more questions. So I think Lucilene was next.
Yes, thank you. Thank you for the great presentation, the comments of all. I have a specific question, Julia. There is something that I thought very interesting in the data between 2006 and 2010. In this period, we can see that there are more women as solo authors and a higher rate of acceptance of their texts, but at the same time, there is a decrease in the presentation of texts by female authors. I would like you to comment what happened, if there is something interesting to say about this period. And I would like Nina to comment something that there is, I think, a preconcept about quantitative analysis is better, always better than qualitative analysis. It is specifically important in economic area. I would like you to say something about that. Thank you.
So thanks, Lucilene. It's a super question, and it's rather complex. So I think I'm only able to answer part of it. And we were also kind of super surprised by the high level of single-authored papers by female in the earlier years. But we also have to keep in mind that kind of SER developed quite kind of drastically. And I can only tell kind of stories that were told me. So maybe others are better able to tell the story. But in my understanding, kind of the number of submissions was much lower back then. And it was also a more closer network of people who know each other. And also there were some figures quite important, and one of them, several of them were also female. So I'm just assuming that it's related to this, but it's more kind of, it's more, it's not a kind of, it's not fact-based. We would development of the journal in general that is visible here.
Just quickly to add, I think you're right, Julia, about those early years. We do not have the denominator, right? How many papers out of how many papers, and that has grown tremendously. You know, we're talking six-fold increase at least between those years that you mentioned, Lucilene, and now. The point about hierarchy in methodology is very well taken, right? As much as we would like to believe that we're all on equal playing grounds, but even thinking about disciplines, and let's say economics, to what extent economic history there, you know, we could classify as different than quantitative or formal modeling is just theoretical to begin with. The dominance is if you do econometrics. So I think when I talk about in that paper that I mentioned, a little bit about that spillover prestige, right? That because economics is shaped in a certain way, also economic sociology might be shaped in a certain way. And as much as we try, and I think that also, let's say, generalist journals, at least in the US in sociology, are trying, they're quite not there yet, right, in terms of representation of qualitative research and historical comparative, or, you know, just a variety of alternative methods to, let's say, regression analyses and statistics. So, that's something we continue to struggle with, right, in the field. And I think leadership of journals have a lot to say. If nothing else, special journals that are devoted to certain topics and publishing work that can be cited will be moving those needles just a little bit. But I do think you're right in pinpointing that there is a general sense in our fields that there is a hierarchy in methods.
Let me just add to this that we are making a conscious effort to give more space for qualitative and historical work, and there is an advantage if you have a qualitative paper. You have an advantage in the sense that we are looking for contributions and submissions that bring new data to the table. And so we are not so interested in somebody taking an existing data set that has been analyzed 10 different or hundreds of ways and now is sort of adding a econometric twist to it. Those are usually papers that we desk reject, even if they are very competent. We are much more interested in papers that bring new evidence to the table. And if you do qualitative work, you cannot do that without actually producing some new evidence. So we would like to see more qualitative, good qualitative, historical, even case studies at SER. But of course, we are very interested in quantitative work as well. So we just want to have a broad palette. And one of our disappointments have been that from countries and regions that are underrepresented send us mostly the kind of econometric exercises which are frankly very sort of uninteresting for SCR. We were hoping to see more sort of novel and creative work coming from Asia and Africa and Latin America, but probably because the authors think that this is the most surefire way of getting published is to run a regression on some data set. We have not been very successful expanding our regional focus.
Thank you very much. We have one more question or comment from Irina.
Yes, thank you very much for this opportunity. I am Irina Kite from Uganda, a small country in Eastern Africa, and I'm so glad to be part of this this meeting and these discussions. I am so impressed by the discussions that is going on and the event, and thanks to the organizers. I had one of the presenters mentioned extending this to different countries, including or continents, including Asia. And I just wanted to know whether you have plans of extending this to Africa, because being a young researcher, I am fully interested, and being someone who is passionate about gender, this is very, very good opportunity for me. And I saw the situation in US and in Africa is actually worse. Given my country, Uganda, you actually realize that probably there is 1% or 0.1 or 0.5% of professors, women professors compared to the male. So it's a big problem. In my faculty, I would say we don't have even a professor who is a female. We have only female professors. So it's only the few of us who are coming up, which there are so many challenges. So this kind of discussions would actually be very applicable to our cases. So again, I thank you so much. And I saw this event on Eventbrite and I took interest, and I'm really happy to be here. Thank you so much.
We are very interested in expanding our reach and pool of submissions to Africa. We already are receiving quite a few. Unfortunately, there is a problem with the fit and the quality, but we would really like to be able to bring workshops to Africa, because I think the way to increase submissions from other parts of the world is to communicate how to be successful in submitting papers, and so whenever we are invited, we go, and we are happy to talk and not just sort of lecture, but also listen.
I just want to add that we're very interested in pairing up actually with institutions or groups that can kind of provide us with an opportunity to reach out to potential author submissions and sort of explain a little more about what the process entails and what it takes to have a paper reviewed positively. So Irina, if you please be in touch with us if you think you can organize something. We could, we would be happy to tune in, zoom in virtually to reach out to potential authors and sort of explain or listen to what the kind of things are being done, and kind of try to find some common ways of making it possible for more papers to be sent to us and for us to review them positively.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
So we have now reached the end of our time, actually. So we won't be able to get further questions, but I am sure Julia and Alya, Akos, and Nina would be happy to discuss this further in the future events or in the future when you meet. Thank you everyone for coming today. Would there be any final remarks that you would like to make before we leave? I'm referring to the presenters and the discussants. Yes, Alya?
I just want to mention that each SASE conference, Akos and I and some other editors come to meet the editors event where we talk about the journal and talk about some major pitfalls, answer questions from the audience. So I just want to encourage everyone to find an opportunity. I'm not sure this is going to be hybrid or virtual. It probably is in person. So I don't know how many of you are actually coming to the conference, but if you are, by all means, make sure that you know when it happens, and we'll be happy to see you and sort of talk to you in the audience.
And I just would
you.
like to thank you, but also say that I see some women authors that I've worked with at SER and have published papers here in the audience. So it happens, right? This is not abstract. And I hope that those who have good experience will tell about it. And everyone is invited. I shouldn't speak about, but Alya and Akos said this too. We make a difference, right, in how we communicate this, spread the word about this, spread about that this is a commitment, a serious one from SASE and from SER. So we hope to see more just as a result of this event. You make a difference, WAG. And thank you, Julia.
Julia?
Yeah, maybe just about the WAG again. So it's an open community. So if you have ideas, if you have plans, if you would like to do something, we are just a committee and we are also an open committee. So if you would like to join, please let us know. If you have an idea about what you would like to do, so we can organize something together. So we really would like to have this as open as possible, also to encourage a lot of people to join and to do something nice in the future. So yeah.
Thank you. That's what I wanted to say as well. But so we have the mailing list and also our official website and the official email address written on the chat. So if you have any questions or if you would like to join, please feel free to reach out to us. Finally, I just would like to end by advertising for our next event. We have another event coming up on the 12th of July at 4 p.m. Central European Time, which is part of the SASE virtual conference. So please keep an eye out for our announcements, and we hope to see you there. Thank you so much for coming today.